So you took on the challenge of painting your car. And odds are you did it outside because, well, not everybody has access to a booth. And although the results were pretty good, they're not exactly perfect. And you may even be just a little bit disappointed with the amount of dirt within the paint. But there's one more thing we can do to possibly fix that. So here we have a Fox body I painted just about a year ago. And in a normal fashion, this is another project I started doing pretty well and never finished it. Now let's take a quick look at the fender. And notice how the fender has a nice finish. It's smooth, it's sleek, and even though this car hasn't been washed in a year, the car still looks pretty good. We can see how just smooth the panel is. And overall, I'm extremely happy with the results of this paint job. Now this isn't very far different than I did on my 240, but we notice how the finish is really nice. Now let's compare it to, for example, the hood. Now if we look on the hood, we have way more texture, and we have a little bit of orange peel, and just overall it's not as crystal clear of an image as the fender is. Now this isn't to say that the quality of the paint on the hood is any lesser than the paint that's on the fender. That's just because on the fender we did a wet sand and buff, and this is essentially going to help color correct. So what exactly is wet sanding? Well, wet sanding, denibbing, and color sanding, these are all the same thing. And the essential part of this is we're essentially going to take away a little bit of the top layer of clear so we can expose a fresh layer of clear that is now smooth and good consistency, and then we'll buff that out and we'll make that layer shine more. Now our end goal is to have a silk smooth surface, so whenever we buff it, the surface under it looks even better. Now how do we do this? We do this by essentially scratching the top coat of clear. Now when I say scratch the surface, let's not grab a rock and just actually go to town on our panel. We're just trying to control the scratch, and we're doing this through sandpapers and different grits. Now when we talk about wet sanding, we're going to be talking about our sandpaper, which is going to be this here. And this is just essentially how we're going to scratch our surface. And if we notice, each one of these papers have a corresponding number. This one says 600. This one is 180. What is the difference between these two pieces of paper? They look similar, but they couldn't be any more different. So we just take a look. This is going to be a coarse grit of paper. This is a 180. We can actually see our grit and see how aggressive it is. And if we actually feel it, we can just tell exactly how aggressive this grit is. But now let's take a look at the other end of the spectrum. This here is our 5000 grit. Okay, notice just how fine it is. It actually looks like a piece of paper. And when you rub it, it feels just like a piece of paper. And it doesn't feel like there's any difference to it. And if we just take a look at any of our random grits here, so this is going to be our 2000 grit, we can tell it has more grit than our 5000, but nowhere near as aggressive as our 180. So the name of the game when it comes to wet sanding is all about controlling our scratch. So if this is your first time doing it, we're going to highly recommend that you use a 1000 grit. The reason being is 1000 grit's rough enough that it's going to cut through most of the material fast, but it's not so aggressive that there's a chance that you're going to burn through everything really quick and then expose your substrate. Now for our case, and with how rough the car was, we actually stepped it down to 600 grit. Now if you have an idea of what you're doing, you can use 600 grit. This is going to make your job extremely fast, as it's going to cut nearly twice as fast as your 1000 grit. The issue with this is it's very easy, if you become distracted for even a second, to burn through your paint. As a side note, all the sandpaper you see here, they're all various different brands that I've had laying around from different projects over the years, and I just use them all just to kind of finish this car. But if I was to go out and buy more sandpaper, I highly recommend this brand, Sunmite. I'm not sponsored by them in any way, they just work very well. The grit's very sharp, it lasts a very long time, and it produces a nice, clean, consistent cut all the way until the paper's done. And as we continue to wet sand, we'll continue moving down our grits from 1500 to 2000 to 25 to 3000 to 5000. We're essentially going to continue the same process. The name of the game is thoroughly completing the grit prior. If you take your time and complete the first grit that you're on before advancing to the next grit, the results are going to be significantly better than if you jump too quickly. But now, before we can actually begin wet sanding, we want to first prep our surface. So we want to clean our surface so we can remove any grime that's on top of it. The reason being is we don't want anything that's on our surface to scratch our surface. Any scratches that are too deep won't be able to get buffed out later. And actually, when you buff the panel, it'll actually enhance that scratch. And you'll notice it way more, and it's going to be a sore thumb sticking out. So we want to first start off by cleaning our surface. Now this is very easy to do. We're going to take some normal water, and we're going to take Dawn dish soap, and we're just going to mix it together. Now the purpose of Dawn is, well, Dawn reduces surface tension of water better than most soaps, so it's going to allow us to actually really clean very well. And on top of that, it's safe for some ducks, so I think we should be good enough to use it on our paint. We're just trying to remove all the grease and anything off our panel before we actually start our process. So, first step, let's prep our wash bucket, and let's get to work on this thing.
So now it's time that we get into wet sand. And we're first going to start off with 1,000 grit. And it actually switches up to the video. We end up going to 600 grit later on. For the reason being that the reason why I'm wet sanding the car is that during my last coat of clear, it had rained on me. And because of that, we had all these rain marks all throughout the panel, as you can tell. And, well, we're just trying to get rid of them. Now, these were actually pretty deep, and doing it with 1,000 was just going to take too long. Even though 1,000 grit's great, it doesn't cut nearly as fast as 600. Conjunction of our sandpaper, we're going to be using this little block. Now, this little block specifically is made by Durablock. What's great about this is, number one, it gives you something to hold on to. Number two, it has a rigid backing, so it lets you be able to sand the panel somewhat flat. And on top of that, I also double it also as a little squeegee. So once I finish wet sanding my panel, I'll go ahead, squeegee the panel across. Helps it dry a little faster and helps you see what I'm actually doing. So we're going to take our sandpaper and we're just simply going to go across. Now, if we notice here, we might need to see all these little speckles, and these are mainly from the water droplets. I actually don't see much dust in this particular part of the panel. But if we look here, I'm not too sure how apparent it's going to be in camera. But this little spot right here would be what dust and dirt is going to look like in your panel. So we're just going to take our time. We're going to wet sand it for a while and show you guys what a finished result is going to look like just in this one particular area. If we look, we can see like this one area here is pretty much smooth now. Now, if we look just slightly above it, we still have all these little freckles everywhere. But this is the area, this is what we're going to be aiming for right here. Same thing we have inside this one area, this little patch, is what we're going to aim for on the entire car. Now, this is a very long process, and pick some favorite songs and take your time because this is very easy to mess this up. So now at this point, we just finished wet sanding. Now, I will be honest, I did have a couple spots where I did burn through the paint. And it's unfortunate, but it's just one of those things that it does happen. Now, the way you can prevent this is work a little slower. Work with a less aggressive grits. All the burn spots happened when I was doing my 600 grit. And honestly, it happened because I was using my DA and not doing it by hand. It's okay. Now, for my specific application where this is a drift car, it doesn't bother me as much. Now, if this was to be a show car, I'd be really unfortunate as I would have to paint it over again. Or maybe even worse, it's a customer's car and now you have to repaint it because you can't give them a bad product. Not to bore you guys, I did do this process for 600 grit, 1,000 grit, 1,500 grit, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, and 5,000 grit. And it's a long process. All you're going to do is wet sand very thoroughly, pay attention to your panel, see what it's doing, see what it's telling you, clean after, and then rinse and repeat the process for each one of them. It is very meticulous and very time consuming, but at the end you will get a nice result. You can tell the car's not even finished getting buffed behind me, and this thing already looks immaculate compared to where it started. And you will notice from the first 600 grit, the paint will be very dull. But as you get upwards of that 5,000 grit, the paint almost has a little shine to it. And it's going to make your buffing process a lot easier as it's just going to shine so quickly. So anyways, that's it for today. Thank you guys for watching. And like always, leave any feedback down below. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.